Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Two Blokes podcast. Today, we're discussing the ways in which men are contributing to their own issues and disadvantages. Pull up a stump and join us. And I'm going to kick things off today because I've had just a few recent experiences where I've watched men be sort of their own worst enemy without meaning to. And it has most often come up in the form of trying to, I guess, mask their own vulnerabilities by basically just saying, well, men are just like that, And in the short run, it's really bad for them because as long as they're doing that, they're not making it clear that, that they or any man is having any trouble, and it shows up in the form of men saying, for example, that, men in general are simple, or, that they only have one thing on their mind, or that they're stupid, or that they're, just hardwired to be patriarchal and oppressive. It kind of depends on which man you're listening to, but too often, they speak out of ignorance, even ignorance of their own situation. And what ends up happening is that, like I said, in the short run, they're adding to their own difficulties by simply, either blaming themselves for it or denying that there's a difficulty to begin with. And in the long run, really what's happening is that that sort of thing is picked up and exploited by people who basically have no empathy for men, whether they are other men or women or across the spectrum. And they point to things like that as a confirmation, right, that men don't really have problems, and whatever problems men do have are their own fault. That's not to say, obviously, that again, it's not to say that men don't contribute to the problems that they have, but only blaming ourselves or denying that those problems are something that we need to handle ourselves, or that we don't need any help for it, means that, like I said, the problem continues to get worse, not by what people do about it, but what they avoid doing about it, which is really anything. And in light of some of the conversations that I've had recently with men, I still see that. Another thing that I see too much of is sort of a blind, unquestioning faith that they're going to be treated well and fairly in the world, even though they are men, as long as they play the system properly. It's a game they can win, right? Just by being really good at family court or dating or education, or a career. And what men's advocates have been pointing out for a long time is that these games are not games, but they are rigged. They're fixed. The outcome is predetermined, and I think people can honestly admit that shows up loudest and brightest in places like family court. If all else fails, they simply drag a case out until the father or husband, whatever, is broken financially and emotionally and mentally, to the point where they stop fighting. And I would say that the good thing to do is to keep up the fight, right? But I happen to know that the resources arrayed against them are not limited. You know, they literally have the full faith and credit of, at least in the States, the U.S. federal government. You know, in Canada, the provincial governments and the Canadian government. United Kingdom, you know, the Crown. Right? It's like, you know, any individual man doesn't stand a chance against that. You know, and that there comes a time when, you know, some alternative approach has to be taken. And as we all know, my approach is simply not to play, right? You know, is not be involved in such a way that I can, you know, I ever have to worry about finding myself in that position, right? But obviously, you know, for many of our friends and many of the friends and the listeners themselves that are out there, you know, that can't be done. You know, you can't simply pick up stakes and walk away, right? You know, that you have a family with children, you know. So that's not an answer either, you know. But I think the starting point is, you know, that we encourage men, especially, not to either deny or try to laugh off or self-efface or, you know, trick themselves into thinking this is okay, because it's not. You know, the world is finally waking up and recognizing that this is bad, you know, and for us to turn around and just shrug and say, oh, you know, it ain't that bad and I'll be okay, is not the right thing to do. You know, it's one thing, you know, to be uncomfortable accepting help, right? But it's entirely something else to just deny that the problem is there. So let me turn it over to you guys. And I guess, Dead Duck, do you want to speak up first?
Right. There is something to be said for men are fairly simple creatures, but they're also extremely complicated, and that we only really want certain things out of life. For example, peace. It's one of the biggest things that needs to be impressed on women when they go into relationships with men. The most important thing you can give a man is peace. You know, it's not necessarily about cooking food and all this other nonsense. But if you bring him peace, he will be happy. So, you know, we are sort of hardwired in that sense, I suppose. I think the pretending that things aren't as bad as they are is a coping mechanism for a lot of guys, because there is this belief that people don't care, society doesn't care what men are going through. And I've encountered people so often that when you start speaking about a particular men's issue, such as say public sphere violence and things like that, you'll get, well, the primary perpetrators are also men. And your point is what exactly? These people, you know, they don't care about the men that are being victimized. And so men see that and they begin to not care themselves about their own victimization, because it's the only way to cope, as it were. And you know, when you've got mental health care services that only think in one way, they're of no good. They're no good to anybody, and especially men. It's a tough nut to crack. It really is. Getting men who have been victimized to understand their victimization. It's not a weakness to say that something has been done to you that was unjust and that you should receive justice and recompense for what you have suffered, whether that's immediate or over a much longer period of time. And it comes back to things I've said in the past about men's humanity and men recognizing their own humanity. For too long, we have been told that we only have value when we bring something to the table, something which society needs. And generally, that's our labour. That's the sweat off our brows, the blood in our veins, and the bones of our skeletons. And unless we are willing to put those at risk for the greater good, we have no value as human beings. Men are being dehumanized. Therefore, they dehumanize themselves. It's all one very big coping mechanism. And you're right in what you're saying, that society is beginning to recognize that there's something very, very wrong going on. And they're trying. Some people are trying to correct course. Unfortunately, there's not enough hands on the tiller, and so things aren't moving as quickly as they should in the direction that they really need to go in. That's my initial thoughts. Tall lady.
Uh, well, you know, when it comes to men, victimization, I think it's just really difficult. I mean, we have this debate over and over and over again in our group that we meet with before we do this stream podcast every Sunday. And we've heard the argument over and over again about men not wanting to be seen as a victim, men not identifying with that, you know, and some people believe that it is something that is born into them, that it's like biologically neurological. There are others who argue it's a social thing. So it's really hard because we don't really have an exact answer for which one it is. But since it's hard for them to see themselves as a victim for whichever reason, which honestly it's probably a mix of possibly both, especially the social kind, since for the longest time we have painted men as, you know, the criminals. They make the majority of criminals in prison, and you know, they make the majority of the people going to war. And so, you know, we paint our war enemies as criminals and inhuman, and in turn that ends up reflecting on gender. And so that becomes an issue where men cannot really, they know they're human, but they feel, you say humanized. I agree there is an aspect where we don't treat them human. They're disposable treatment when it comes to being, you know, the soldiers and that kind of stuff. But another problem is we've sort of criminalized them in our view, and they view themselves in that way to a certain extent. They're scared to open up and scared about talking about certain things because they can't let themselves see themselves as the victim because they're in a mindset where they're the ones who have done something wrong. And so that ends up hurting them personally, each man themselves, because then sometimes they don't seek help. They don't notice what's going on. They try to refuse to accept what's going on. You know, there might be something happening to them that's happening to many others. They don't speak up. A great example of that would be there's a YouTuber named Jack Wright, and his best friend, his best female friend that he's known since childhood, who's also a TikToker. She's this body positive dancer TikToker, and he was sexually assaulted by her. And I guess my understanding at first he was thinking not to be female, but then he finally did, and he made a whole video and everything. I've heard nothing about the case since. As far as I'm aware, she still isn't in jail for this, or you know, there's been no penalty against her for what she's done. But he spoke up about it. And when he spoke up about it, that's when they found out he was not the first person she had done it to. First of all, they found out that she'd been doing this for a while because he hadn't spoken up before, because he kept being told, well, it's your friend, you know, it's just normal, other things. And so he didn't see himself as a victim because it was his friend, and you know, he thought, oh, maybe, you know, I'm doing something wrong, whatever else. He didn't know it was wrong. He acknowledged he knew that it was wrong, but he told her no multiple times, but he didn't want to go against her. And then when he came out, many other people started coming out who had refused to report her because they couldn't go in the victim mindset. And so you got cases like that where you're letting people stay out. And then, you know, there's another issue too when it comes to men. I think Les addressed a little bit of men hurting other men and the game and the advantages. You know, there's in the world of the men's rights movement, it's not only about men, it's about class. It really is. Men's issues pertain to all men, but if you are a man that has the money amount of Bezos or of Buffett or I don't think of his name, Elon Musk, then things differ a bit because they control so many things with their money. They give donations to things that can cause changes. They can convince people to vote for changes in laws and acts in written on paper that could be severely damaging. They support organizations that can be severely damaging, even more so to the social structure that is hurting men and frankly also women. It hurts both of us, but we don't realize it. And these other men sort of don't, first of all, they don't want to acknowledge like their issues, and some of them don't even know about it. Like they don't realize, oh, this is like wrong because they've been taught it's normal, because we are getting to that point where some things are being taught as normal to do to men that are horrible. Like some people are taught it's okay to, like, you know, hurt a man and stuff, and he's not supposed to ever hit you back, things like that. But also the majority of men are not higher class, and they're getting damaged by the higher class men, the few that there are. The majority of men are not underclass, middle class or lower class, day to day working, they go back to families, homes, they have situations, they don't have as much time, they don't have as much money, they don't have the same resources, and so they cannot really do as much as a wealthier man could, in terms of like their own support personally, and then trying to make changes, of course. And that's sort of damaging. That's the wider view. That's men damaging other men. And then there's, of course, as mentioned, personal damage. So there's two ways men sort of hurt themselves, if that makes sense.
Right. And, the irony is that, people that are just misandrist, whether they're men who are, internalized misandrists or women who are misandrists, is that gives a lot of credibility to them whenever they say, men's problems are men's own fault and men's responsibility to fix. Because at the end of the day, that's one of those things that's not even wrong. It's so poorly thought out and so deliberately incomplete that it just adds to that pressure for men, like I say, to either blame themselves, blame each other, or sometimes just deny that there even is a problem. More and more every day, I think it's becoming just apparent to everybody that there's problems, and I think it's equally clear that it's unreasonable and unreasoning to blame our problems on women, even women who are feminists, unless they are specifically, adding fuel to that fire. And that's that's not an emotion thing. That's just the facts on the ground. Is that if we can't, or if we are always unwilling, to, like Tall Lady was saying, just go ahead and admit that something is wrong and we need help with it. If we can't do that, again, facts on the ground, the people that are, not working against us still need an incentive to help out, right? They have lives of their own and, mouths to feed and bills to pay, and not allowing them to see that something is really wrong, it again, it doesn't give them any reason to put any effort or resources or, any voice to the idea that, this is what it's come to. This is where we are now. And like I said, the kind of people, Tall Lady, that you mentioned, the kind of men that you mentioned, they have a very strong vested financial interest into making sure that what's going on right now does not change. Because if it changes, they lose money, and in the political sphere, the men, again, working against us, lose power, right? And they lose influence. They won't have, if we correct these problems, they will no longer have things that they have now, right? And they don't want that, right? So it is in their best interest to, like the YouTuber you were talking about, Tall Lady, it's in their interest to make sure that, that kind of publicity doesn't get a lot of attention, because if it does, like I said, yeah, people are going to be very angry about it. That's one thing. But some people like us, are actually going to work to make that not happen anymore, you know. And again, you know, that means they will lose, right? And that's why, you know, so often when I get into these discussions, whether it's online or in real life, you know, I'm not very often given to just directly challenging something said, you know, that's disparaging or unfair or unjust toward men, you know, because as you've heard me say before, you know, I am not interested in creating exiles, right? I want converts. I don't want to object to what anyone says or does with or about me, right? I just want them to stop doing it, you know? And if that means that I have to persuade them that the only sensible thing to do is to stop doing it and start helping us, you know, I'm willing to do what it takes to make that happen. But at the same time, you know, if I look around and, you know, I see other men that are either, you know, all they're doing is, you know, pointing back at their detractors and saying, you know, no, it's you, you know, and having it escalate on social media like Facebook and Twitter, you know, endlessly. You know, like I said, that I don't see any converts there. You know, I don't see anybody waking up from that, right? I see, you know, two different camps getting further and further entrenched in where they are, and I'm not interested in that. You know, if I want that, all I have to do is, you know, watch international politics, right? But you know, if I want change, if I want to know that people are really deciding it's in their own best interest, you know, to treat us and see us differently than they do right now, you know, that's what I'm going to do, right? You know, I don't want to hate on them, you know, I don't. I want them to start doing what we tell them to do, right? And to stop doing what we tell them to stop doing, right? And I don't really care how that happened, you know. That's kind of a consequentialist viewpoint. But, you know, from my perspective, we've tried all that other stuff. You know, the three of us, we have colleagues that regularly, you know, kind of boast about how they schooled this, that, or the other, you know, blue-haired feminists. And if that was paying the bills, I wouldn't say a thing. But I don't see any of that moving the needle. You know, some of them have been at it for a long time, right? And you know, in those places, in social media, things are worse than ever, you know. And I'm like, it's not what I want, you know. Um, if they never change, you know, and they hold their position that, you know, men are bad and you know, kill all men and whatever, if they hold on to that forever, you know, I don't see very many ways to change that, right? At least not for me. But if, you know, John and Jane random public can hear me and say, you know, I certainly don't want to follow what those people are doing, but I'm willing to take a chance on what this guy is doing because at least it looks a little more mature and it looks a little more sensible, you know, because like I said, you know, it's getting to where everybody is feeling that pinch. You know, men have unfortunately become numb to it because we've had it for so long, you know, but the time has come, you know, to start feeling that pinch again and admitting it to people that are, you know, at least willing to listen. You know, if any of them end up saying, you know, I'm just not buying it, everything looks okay for you, again, you know, I'm pretty sure that with all of the evidence in front of everybody and with the decline in you know, just basic human decency, if I can't point to that and say this is what I'm talking about and have them say, oh, okay, yeah, that looks bad, I don't know what will work, you know, but I will move on to somebody else that might look at all that and say, yeah, that looks pretty bad, something should be done. You know, don't have an unlimited amount of time, to do my little part. And I don't believe in wasting it on people that I am sure are never going to change their mind and will correspondingly use anything I say against me in order to make me look invalid or bad or ulterior or malicious. If I leave them alone, they'll have nothing to say, right? And like I said, I was in a therapy session with a group of men earlier today, and I said that I always feel really good whenever I hear a man say, sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing. And of course that gets me in trouble with a lot of people, because the one thing men are never allowed to do is nothing, right? But whenever I hear that, that tells me that, yeah, sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing, right? And I didn't invent that out of a vacuum. I took these things from the early labor movement in the West and the civil rights movement and the anti-apartheid movement and the struggle for independence in India. Those movements produced some leadership that's legendary and that has changed the world. So in that way, I'm pragmatic. I believe in what works, right? And over again, the common thread in all those movements is the boycott and the strike and the job action, where you comply with, quote, the rules, to the letter. It's what they call malicious compliance. When you do that, you bring things to a halt, and you can stand up and say, okay, maybe we ought to have a different set of rules, because these ones don't work, right? And if it gets bad enough, we're going to stop doing any work at all. These things have moved the world over and over and over again. They are legal. They are moral. They are an expression of human autonomy, right? There is nothing about those things that is bad, right? Except that when they are practiced in the right place at the right time, they bring everything to a grinding halt. But I have a choice. I can do that, or I can spar with Tumblerinas on Tumblr and Facebook and Twitter. One of these will ultimately be effective. The other will waste my time. And again, if I had unlimited time, I would waste it like anybody else. I don't. I have this much time, which is fine, but I'm going to use it. Right? So I don't know, Dad, what do you think?
I think one thing we do need to be very, very careful of is dehumanizing somebody based on the contents of their wallet or their bank account. At the end of the day, the likes of Buffett, Gates, Musk, and Bezos, they're still human beings at the end of the day. I mean, let's not forget, Jeff Bezos was recently divorced and he got absolutely taken to the cleaners, comparatively speaking. He's been taken for an amount of money which is just absolutely obscene, but it is what it is. So, unfortunately, these guys do tend to work from a lofty perch and vote against their own interests, as it were, quite often because they can. But at the end of the day, they are humans and they are prone to mistakes, as it were. So I'm not someone who likes looking at billionaires and what have you and having any negative feelings towards them. I don't think it's necessary. As far as everything else, you're talking a little bit earlier on about arguing with feminists and what have you. There's some utility in that. It's something I'm doing less and less of these days. And on the social media side, sometimes it actually ends up working in our benefits because the crazies always reveal themselves. I had one a few weeks back. I put out a video basically calling on her for her misandrous attitude, and she decided to make multiple accounts reposting the same video over and over and over again. and said she was going to do that. Well, I never responded to her. Just like, well, you carry on doing what you want to do, love, because I'm not interested in playing that particular game with you. I've said what I had to say, and I'm leaving it at that. And going back to this thing of men not helping themselves, I think unfortunately, until society decides to start seeing the inherent value in every man, irrespective of where he comes from, his station in life, they all have value. And until people start to see that, I don't see very many of the issues being solved. I mean, could you imagine if all of a sudden men's basic humanity from birth was recognized straight away? You know, we would never cut a baby again, for example. No man would ever be on the streets, or very few men would be on the streets. There would be no call for these men to be sent to fight in wars that are completely and utterly unnecessary. Let's face it, the last just war we had was World War II. Everything else after that has been questionable at best.
If they humanize men, I mean, to be honest, we probably, this sounds bad, but if men were humanized from birth and women were humanized at birth, same time, both humanized, I think I know some people are going to disagree, but I think there'd be more peace in the world.
Yeah, that again, it comes down to a matter of
people would be.
I was going to say it comes down to a
Go ahead,
matter
Ted, sorry.
of what the motive is, and the upside of recognizing anybody's humanity is that you become willing to share and appreciate it. The downside is then you have to try to keep doing that. But if it were that way, I think probably our last war would have been a long time ago, a long time before any of us was born. I've lived through periods of time where, there was more open conflict and combat, during those periods of time than any other time in human history, more hotspots, right? So, it's easy enough to just stand back and say we're going in the wrong direction, but tall lady, what you were just saying, recognizing the humanity and the value and the validity of male humans as soon as they're born, right? And to do the same with human females as soon as they're born, that puts it on everybody's shoulders to, like I said,
Think about
not see anybody as expendable.
Ukraine, yeah, that's where I was gonna go. Like, if you think about it, like literally Ukraine sent their women away and kept their men. That's a huge sign when it comes to war. We send men for war. If you humanize men, then suddenly I don't want to say there is no reason for war, but there is much less reason for war.
Yeah, it really would
now
become.
They don't want to sacrifice their men.
Exactly, it would really become, the like the extension of human politics.
More talks about real human rights.
Right. It would be what people do only when absolutely positively everything else has failed, and it's like nobody would want to do it. Right now there are a lot of people that want to have war, and they're not all wealthy oligarchs. Too many of them are the kind of ordinary people, that just for whatever reason, they can't drum up just innate value in a young man. Now, in saying that out loud, that really sounds crazy. I mean, it's like, how could you not value young men? Our track record is that we don't. We don't. Right? We raise them, to become potentially weapons of war. We send them to war, and we promise them if they kill enough people, and whether they themselves live or die, they'll be a hero. They'll be thought well of, right? It's like, so what? I I can live without that kind of validity, right? But again, when that's all I've talked to men like this, it's like they feel that way about themselves because that's all they've ever been exposed to, is that they are here to work and sacrifice and kill and bleed and die. And like I said, what that means is, going back to what you said about seeing their humanity, it's not only that others don't see enough of their humanity, but they're not allowed to see it for themselves. Now this is the extreme. This is the end point of male disposability, right? But in the day to day, all of this uproar and panic and blowback against men, simply like demanding their humanity be recognized, it comes from the fact that, we've done such a poor job of even addressing it. Are men people? I mean, at some point, you got to come up with either a yes or a no, and if the answer is yes, only if they do X, Y, and Z, then it's like some won't be able to do that, and that means what? They're not quite human. It's like these are, people think of this and they kind of blow it off like it's all so obvious, and I wish it was, I do, but it really isn't. It's complicated and difficult, and it forces ordinary people trying to go about their lives to look in very dark places, right? Not only in themselves, but in the society that they live in, and people don't like to do that. So this is why for me, I don't find a lot of comfort or put a lot of faith in back and forth mudslinging. Because like I said, I'm a man, and as a man, that kind of behavior can always be used against me, right? It can always be used to confirm that I'm not quite as human as I ought to be, right? And it's like I have this little bit of time left here, to do stuff. And, when I started getting well, I made a lot of commitments to myself. And one of them was that, I'm going to show the world that I'm a human being, and that, I'm very badly damaged, but I'm working very hard to get better. Or if I can't show the world that, I'm going to die trying. I'm going to leave out of here in the natural course of things, and I'll be able to say to myself on that last breath that I did my part, and either they took it or they didn't. I can't make those decisions for them. They're going to have to make them for themselves. I don't get me wrong. I want to make those decisions for them. I want to tell people what to think, right? And I want to tell people how to treat me and how to behave toward each other, and men in particular. I don't, currently enjoy that luxury, and I'm not sure that I want to. But since I can't, like I said, I sit around inventing new ways to prove, that I'm a human being, and that I'm badly damaged, and that I am working so hard to get better, and to be better. But there are limits, and the corresponding effort, it's unfortunate, but it's going to have to, either it will come from everyone else or it won't, and if it doesn't, then I said, all I am is one man, but my face and that voice, and these efforts, I hate to say it, but they represent millions of men, millions, and I happen to have, enough craft of language to be able to put that across so it's not so hard to understand. Most men I know don't even know how to begin. They don't have the words for it. And I see them struggle, right? And what they end up doing, like I said, is, just like shrugging their shoulders and making a joke. And I'm like, there was a time when that was a valid coping mechanism, but that time is over. That's never gonna work again.
Yeah.
It's too bad because I like to make jokes. You guys know I like to make fun of myself once in a while, and have a laugh.
Mm.
But I'm like, I don't very
I mean,
often
who
do
doesn't
that.
love a self-deprecating joke?
Right. But like I said, if it was still working, I'd still be doing it.
Yeah.
And that time is over now. I kind of miss it, because it's fun, right? And it's entertaining, but for the time being, until these things start to get better, I got to put that aside,
Yeah.
and I have to speak seriously with people. My conversation last night was an example of that. Was this guy, with all the best intentions, all he was doing was, trying to be entertaining, right? And trying to be clever and trying to, make an impression. But in the process of doing it, without knowing it, he was hurting himself and, all the other men and boys that he knows. And if I can't even get it across to him that, what he's doing is harmful and unwise, that's on me. I mean, I was given certain tools and aptitudes and just stuff that I can do. And if I don't use it when things like that come up, that's my fault. Then I have an amends to make. Right. I'm the one that screwed up. But as long as I'm doing that, I'm doing my part.
Mm. I think one of the comments I make quite often that sort of shocks people, and I know it's sort of shaken my other half, and I think it actually shook a couple of people in the other group last week. Do you remember when we were talking about 3 lorry drivers had died last week,
Yeah.
the week before?
Yeah.
And the question was asked, did I know them? And I said, well, I see their faces every time I look in the mirror.
Yeah.
I think that hearing me
Yeah.
say that shakes people.
Yeah.
But it's the truth.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing where, like after, and this happens to me too, after you say it and you see that reaction, there's this part of you that says to yourself, this is where we are now. This is a shocking and extraordinary statement, when it's as plain as the nose on their face that, you're the reflection of those men, is a reflection of ourselves too.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, the time to just wish that wasn't true is over. We have to accept it. You had to accept it. I have to accept it, and, to once again, give you your due, tall lady, you accept it also, and it's like it's jarring a little bit for all of us to hear, but your first instinct is to say, yeah, but it's true, and once you can reach that point, once you can say to you, like, just to yourself, he's not wrong, this is hard to hear, but it's very true. And being happy about it, or being all comfortable with it, isn't really part of the discussion, because it is true. And a lot of things are true that I really don't like, but only, like, for me, only being shocked about it, right? And only letting it kind of like rattle me up and disrupt my day and everything, that's not enough. I think for a long time it was. Once again, that time is over. We've hit that place where the old rules of the game no longer apply, and they won't work. They won't work for us. They won't work for for women. They won't work for anyone. And,
Yeah.
again, I don't like that. I want to be complacent, I want to be lazy, right? I want to, just assume that others will pick up slack that I leave. And, that I can't make that assumption.
Mm.
I have to put aside the desire to be lazy, complacent, satisfied, even optimistic a lot of the time, and say, no, I really enjoy those feelings, whether they're healthy or not,
Mm.
but I can't afford them. I got to let go, and I got to get, roll my sleeves back up again, and keep at it. Because this, if I can't say I'm doing it, how am I going to ask anybody else?
Mm. Yeah, I think that the thing that sort of rattles people with that, when I say that, I see those faces in the mirror, is with the ease with which I say it, and it almost sounds like I don't have a problem with saying it. I'm not comfortable with it, but I've made my peace with it. But it's also a reflection of I understand my own humanity, and I understand the need for empathy for my fellow men, and I don't just mean that as in the human race. But it's also an expression of chivalry in its purest form. Because,
Yeah.
and I don't want to sound like I'm being rude to you here, tall lady, but chivalry was never about women. It never
No.
was. It was about men's treatment of men.
No,
And if we could bring back
it
that
was
kind,
like a an honor,
yeah,
an honor
if
passing.
if we
What are
could
they?
bring,
What's it called?
it was
Sorry,
it was a
I don't know why English went out, but when you do like an honor code between two men, I don't
yeah,
know what it's called.
yeah, it was a code of conduct between medieval knights essentially
Right.
to stop them from killing each other, basically. If
Yeah.
we could bring that back, what a world we could create. Honestly,
It would,
it's,
it,
it
it
might
would,
sound
no, it
idealistic of me.
practically speaking, it would resolve a lot of things that right now are like unsoluble.
Mm,
But as always, it comes at a cost, right? And
yeah,
the first, the first expense is going to be like convincing people that there are, like many elements of straight chivalry that are a direct resolution to problems that like everybody is complaining about, not just women, not just men, everybody. And the second expense would be that, like I said, we haven't lived in that kind of world for a long time. And so, people would have to endure the discomfort of making that work. The only way to make it work is not by coercion and not from the top down, but individually and from the bottom up. I would have to look at that code, that code of honor and conduct and say, A, I can do that. B, I'm willing to do that. And C, it's, I'm doing it for a purpose. Like I'm not
mm,
just trying to look good, that like I have to be presented with, it's either do this or things continue to get worse. Because, I surprise myself all the time with the kinds of things I can do when I understand, the like dire consequences if I don't, you but on the other hand, I'm like, it's not that hard for me to see that, right? It's
mm,
not that hard for you to see that. It's not that hard for tall ladies to see that. But, the average schmo stumbling down the road already has a whole plate full of problems, and
mm,
they spend their lives, having this kind of thing hidden from them, the benefits of such things, right? So it's like there are, again, you call these men human beings, but and they are, but their success and their position constrains them from allowing average schmo to be exposed to this, because the exposure and the internalizing of, the capacity to, for average men to really be really good men, it will cost them, our ability to be selfless brought to its logical conclusion would have those people on their knees in a month. So let's not, we recognize everyone's humanity and everything, but let's not forget for a minute that, we don't have an uphill battle to fight against, well, against, in the Bible, it would say powers and principalities, forces arrayed against us, that have literally unlimited resources. We have a voice, right now, our voice is augmented and made clearer by the simple fact that too much is unacceptable to too many people right now. The economy is unacceptable, social order is unacceptable, education is a moral crime, and the plight of the genders has gotten to the point where everybody's tired of it. They're resentful and bitter and angry, but the ones that get past all that, I don't want to brag, but people like us, get over the emotions of it and try to make sense of it and try to resolve it, but we start with a desire to make it better, but then we got to put our brains to use. And most of the time, putting our brains to use is a matter of, like I say, finding converts, finding regular people that can be made to see things the way we do. And saying it out loud, that sounds pretty simple, but when you start trying to do it, you find out how hard it is. I do it all the time, and it's never easy. And it's never, it always costs me, always hurts a little bit. If I have to tell somebody, what my life used to be like, right? I can do it and I can articulate it, but it's just like that scene from the movie, one of the X-Men movies where, Rogue is asking Wolverine, does it hurt when your claws come out of your hand? It's like every time, but the claws still have to come out because things have to get done. And, I have to bare my soul sometimes because things have to get done, and I find I can afford it. I heal up quick. Not everybody's like that. My friend that I was in the therapy session today with, I would never ask him, to do what I do, right? Because he'd be dead in a week, and that would be wrong, But for the people who can do it, people like yourselves, I have to insist. So I know too many men, and I also ironically know too many women, that can't voice the kind of stuff that we're talking about. And what that means is, these days we kind of have to. It's unfortunate. And again, there are other things I would rather be doing. But until then, it's this, into the foreseeable future. Because right now, we certainly have a lot of enemies, and we certainly face a lot of indifference, people that just don't even think about it enough to worry about it. We have very few converts, and until we have more, like I said, I pick and choose my, I pick and choose the times when I draw my claws out, and I try to show them to the right people for the right reason, because just having them out, all it does is hurt me, so I don't know. What do you guys think?
You got any thoughts, tall lady?
Huh? I'm trying to formulate a response. I don't know what to say. I just, we've gone to this part of the topic so many times where it's about, Honestly, the thing with the claws and Wolverine, I think, was a great analogy and the best way to put it. It hurts, but you have to do it.
Thank you.
And that's the only way you can describe most of what's going on right now. I
Yeah.
mean, the laws that they've come out with, VAWA and other things, and this is sort of the hard part about what needs to be done, really, not only for the men's rights movement, but for almost every movement, every person, is there needs to be a change, but it needs to be an equal change of new and old. We need to go backwards and forwards at the same time.
Yeah. I
Because
know
there are
that.
some things that change that need to be taken seriously, the problem with monopoly and stuff. There needs to finally be a law for that. But at the same time, we got things like BAWA. And it's hard because although it's supposedly quote unquote new, there's so much of it that's also based on the old, or that's just a loophole based on like the old and a loophole of the new that need to be untangled and sort of straightened out, combed out with hair, with a fine tooth comb, just try to figure out what's going on there and fix it up because, everything is outdated and undated at the same time. We need to find a sense of community again. When we were talking about how Dead Dog had said at the meeting that he had shaken people because he said he saw those people in the mirror. One of the big problems today, and also not a problem, is the fact that we're finally addressing individuality and the importance of self, but it's coming at the cost that people cannot seem to understand the line between individuality and self and being egotistical and arrogant and uncaring and just going too far. So many of these supposed self-care influencers and stuff, they're not so much self-care as they are just egotistical. They're full of themselves, to be frank.
Right. Right.
And that's become a big crutch on society because then they forget that when you look in the mirror, you're not looking at just yourself.
Right.
You're looking at a whole group of people. For Mike, it was the truckers who died and the truckers he works with and truckers of the world made, the fellow UK citizens. You're still part of a group, a community, and we've sort of lost that community support element quite a bit, and that community support element is what needs to really come back because that was sort of a way to even out the self-care. It was a way to balance self-care so that a person wouldn't fly into egotism because it humbled you. Mike talks about he looks in the mirror. Mike talks about that he looks in the mirror and he sees the truckers. Well, I look in the mirror, I see other ladies who were hurt. I see the desaparecidos, the disappeared of Latin America.
Right.
I'm not one of them, but I look just like them. That could have been me.
Yeah.
But it's not.
No.
There's so many groups and we forget about what's going on because we're so focused on self because we've lost that community. And so when Mike says that, or anyone says something like that, it shakes them because they have not been thinking about me. They've only been thinking about self and they completely threw out the community element that's supposed to balance them.
Right. Yeah. The slop of not recognizing, individuality and selfishness and the line between them means that, and this has always been true, it means you stumble across it all the time. And there was a time when that was looked down upon, be whether male or female, or anything else, be self-reliant, but don't be selfish, because you are in company with many other people who are also learning to be self-reliant. And your choices are either be selfish or help them. And those are our choices today. But the people like the influencers you were talking about, they have found a way to weaponize and monetize that self-absorbed selfishness at the expense of, whomever around them they can exploit, whether it's their followers or their target. And like I say, that's another reason why I don't really imbibe, right? Because I don't care to fall into that. It's not something that I'd be able to live with myself certainly if I ever found myself becoming that kind of influencer. But on the other hand, even if I didn't, like from our perspective and from our position, even now that market is saturated, right? I mean, the people that are regularly contributing to all of that, and Dad, I'll give you credit here. You certainly do it. You all certainly do it better than I ever could. I'm just, that's not my forte, right? But beyond that, it's my responsibility to remind you that, doing that comes at a cost and there are risks. You both of you navigate all of the risks that we're under very well. And that's why I talk to you. There are some that don't navigate those risks and those costs very well at all. And when it comes to that, there's guilt to be shared on every side. At the same time, tall lady, you had brought up the disappeared in the Latin Americas, and the disappeared here among indigenous people, and like you said, I don't have a direct connection to that because I'm not disappeared yet, but at the same time, if I have to spend time looking in the mirror, I still have to understand that, I represent somebody, that didn't blow their brains out, didn't jump off a bridge, right? Didn't work themselves to death, didn't entirely disengage from society and just give up and, live in the basement and play video games. But they're there. I look in the mirror, and like I say, if I do more than just shave and wash my face, I see those people, I see those truckers, right? I've never driven a commercial truck in my life, but, I know that in a lot of ways, those men were like me, and when you can do that and still be an individual, and still recognize that, there's no escape from that connection, that you'll either, be able to embrace it and take part in it, or it will come for you. There are rules to this, and that's one of them, that, if you deny your own humanity, everyone else will be happy to deny it along with you, in the interest of serving their own, right? So the better thing to do is just not deny your own humanity. Actually, I think that might be a good place to close this up on, if you guys don't have anything further, or if you do, just let me know.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you both, and thank you everyone for listening, and we will see you again really soon. Bye-bye.